My name is Marcus Tisdale, and this we are live with my guest here, Vaffa Kamalpour, and he is a very, very interesting um Substacker. He's we follow each other on Substack, and we kind of comment on each other's articles and notes, and we've just been kind of following each other for the last few months. And he has a very interesting perspective, particularly his perspective of civic nationalism, which we will dive deep into in this uh, in this segment. Uh, um, Kamalpour, Mr. Vaffa, would you like to, uh, you know, uh, uh, what's the word? it's Would you like to go through a little bit of into your background and introduce yourself?
Sure, of course. So, hello again. My name is Vaffa. To make a very long story short, I have a little bit of a different background. So you can tell from my name and my appearance. My background's from the Middle East. My background's Iranian, but I was born in Australia and I grew up in the United States. So I've always had this sense of not really knowing where I belong. Just that's kind of a typical story with a lot of immigrant folks. I grew up in Northwest Indiana and Western Pennsylvania. I come from a Muslim household, and over the years, um, I've kind of thought a little bit deeply about like America's future, where things are going, because I'm not the sort of person to just be content with having talking heads and folks of that nature kind of tell me how, like, what the future entails when I can see that their words and their theories and their actions don't line up in a way that actually tells me that things are going in a good direction. So I've always felt a little bit politically lost for very obvious reasons. I never was really uh, favorable towards the Republican Party or the right for that matter. I grew up my entire life in America. I've listened to the Republican Party tell me that they want to bomb where my family lives. That is kind of just a no-brainer for me in that regard. But when it comes to the Democratic Party, I had some since I grew up during the War on Terror, I had this our family specifically had this natural association that the Democratic Party was the anti-war party. Not that all Democrats voted anti-war, but that the best chance that we had for seeing the Middle East, because of our family being there, be more peaceful, or just rather just not be in a constant state of chaos, would come from a democratic form of politics. So we didn't become citizens until 2016. We are Took us about 19 years to become U.S. citizens. Uh, our family's struggles with the immigration system also play a role in my understanding of identity and specifically national identity. Um, and with all that in mind, I kind of landed upon this notion of civic nationalism. First, it's a relatively ambiguous uh, political ideology, to be quite frank, because it's not rooted in material conditions that are traditionally associated with the left. And it's not necessarily, it's not associated with ethnic identities or religions or anything of like those harder sort of characteristics that are employed by right-wing nationalisms. And in many respects, I kind of landed on civic nationalism. One, because it's also a little bit of like it gets your attention in today's day and age as well, because with our current political environment, the notion of civic nationalism is just, it doesn't exist, because right now it's very tribal, it's very identitarian and very segmented, atomized. So I landed upon civic nationalism. And I guess I would describe myself as a social democratic civic nationalist to kind of really give you a comprehensive understanding. And because of all my experiences and watching how things were going down, I just landed on this phrase called the New American Perspective. I was like, what am I like? Why am I thinking like this? What's going on here? And I was like, oh, well, this is, I guess, well, a new American perspective. Let's see if we can look at everything that has happened and try to think of something better. Like, we can't just be in this constant state of opposition towards the encroaching far right and corrupt nature of this moment. I couldn't see, at least from my own perspective, that the left wing in America or just left wing politics as a whole knew what it was doing from like a system wide perspective.
Yeah.
So for me, the New American perspective is an attempt at remedying this. Is that how's
Cool.
that?
No, that's great. That's great. I have many more questions than I have answers. I've read through your doc, and there's just so many questions. So you know, you talked about this concept of what you referred to as a nation of all nations, and that to me sounds like uh, it sounds like basically ancient Rome, right? A place where all roads meet, right? And it's kind of like this place where things germinate and people come, people come and they become a part of a new civic identity similar to the way that Rome was conceived. But as we know, America was not has taken some aspects from Rome, from ancient Rome. They're taking some aspects from the Roman Republic in their system of government. However, it clearly went into a completely different direction, right? So, could you explain a little bit more about this idea of a nation of nations, and also how do we get there from our current, you know, basically, from our current understanding of America to this new understanding?
Sure. So first off, that phrase, "the nation of all nations," I read it first in this book by Jill Lepore. It's called "The Case for the Nation," and that phrase stuck with me because it kind of more or less it articulates a more like inclusive society in a way that makes more sense to me, which is to say that uh, America being this place where, as an immigrant, you show up and you are forced to kind of conform to something that is not quite authentic, even to itself, is jarring. It's very different than maybe the experience of immigrating to other countries. And it's very interesting that you bring up the notion of the Roman Empire, because as a person of Iranian background, the Persian Empire is a lot more relevant to like our conception of ourselves. And even more so is that the Persian Empire was this geopolitical entity that more or less sought, not through strict military conquest, but more through, how do I put this? It was one of the first multi-ethnic, religiously diverse uh, states to ever exist, and its
Mm.
contest with the Roman Empire, because they existed at the same time, led to the exchange of ideas. And it's interesting to me that a lot of these ideas that I have about the nation of all nations being something worth exploring kind of stems from that exchange of East and West. And to me, at least from my own kind of personal research, the very idea of Western civilization has always been a little bit not totally accurate to me. That there's always just like human civilization and how it is built through the exchange of ideas, and that exchange is not always peaceful.
Yeah,
Wars are a thing that have happened for millennia. We can't pretend like there's been some better time in the past that where everything was fine, but rather that this idea of the nation of all nations is not restricted to any sort of geographical or like religious tradition. Like this is something that we can do no matter what the past has demonstrated. As you said, America is this place that went in a very particular direction at its founding, where it did attempt to borrow those ideas from Rome, but did it in a ethno-supremacist fashion.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, and also I wanted to talk about that. As you know, America was founded as basically as a white European ethno state, where they explicitly said in the act of the Immigration Act of I think some Immigration Act of 1790, I think it was, where they basically said you had to be white and male uh, in order to be considered an American, or to be considered an American citizen. Um, so, how do we go from a national conception where you know whiteness is what defines you as an American, to this new concept of American as uh, sort of an amalgamation of different nations, right? So that's kind of that's from an American perspective, and I think that America tries and has tried to reach toward that at different aspects of different parts of its history, in the 1960s in particular, and also during the Reconstruction. As we know, the Reconstruction failed. It started after immediately after the Civil War, and then sort of things sort of kind of worked for about 10 years, and then it went to hell basically. And America basically fell back on its white supremacist foundation, right? So how do we go and this time really solidify a a multipolar society, right? How do we do that?
So, very interesting that you bring up Reconstruction because civic nationalism has occurred in American history, albeit very few times and very briefly. And there's only really been one political party at one point in time that was identifying itself as a civic nationalist movement. And that was the Republican Party during the American Civil War. So the fact that Reconstruction came out of a branch of radical Republican politics at that point in time, I think it's very interesting that we're able to make that connection right now because it shows that civic nationalism and this desire, or rather this, even, how do I put this, even when the people as the majority were not always in line with the vision that was being pushed forward, they still fought and died for that vision. And that happening at that point in time, at least for me, showed that even if it did not end up the way it works, it did not end up the way I wanted it to. Um, it shows that America tries.
Yeah,
Tries. It's a place that is willing to put in the effort.
yeah,
And I think that with regards to civic nationalism attempting to undo, or rather to change, America's history of whiteness and like what that means for people living in America, I think it is best served if we, at the very least, phrased it as this thing that has not even served Americans who believe that whiteness has served them well. Rather, that it is the very hierarchy created by white supremacy has trapped the majority of the white Americans in a kind of political, economic stagnation that ultimately this was never going to be something that served you well. This was never going to be something that even brought you together because American culture right now, it's quite isolating. It's not very warm right now.
yeah,
And I think, and you can tell me what you think about this, but I think that America's insistence throughout its history to segregate, to divide, to keep people away from one another based upon their race or their religion or any other characteristic, has truly done damage to American sense of self. That in the pursuit of those types of goals, uh, white supremacy, in essence, is a consistent, slow burning act of national and cultural suicide.
Hmm. Wow, there's a lot to unpack there. There's a lot to unpack there. That's wow. Um, so this idea of cultural suicide. Are you saying that we're going that in our current direction, going into sort of civilizational suicide? And I can see what you're saying is, you know, we're going in a very dark direction, right? Clearly, this is getting very dark, and it's getting very uh it's like giving me these bad ending vibes. We're going towards the bad, we're not going towards the good ending, right? So in terms of the society that you envision, that sounds to me like what I would describe as the good ending, which is basically figure out a way to reconcile our differences. We figure out a way to move forward, and also we figure out a way to include not just people of different races, but people of different social classes into a new society that integrates all of those things. Um, that is, uh, what's the word? Cathartic. There's a certain, cathartic uh, aspect to this transformation, right? It's a certain sense of relief on all sides, where you know on one hand, white America can relieve the sort of burden of America's original sin, the original, some of the things that happened earlier on in America's history, very bad, and sort of move forward, and also Black America and other minority groups can also move forward, uh, and kind of you know look forward to an America that upholds uh, and affirms their rights, their humanity, right? So uh, I think that that's the direction that would represent the good ending, right? But tell me about the direction that you think we're going into that will lead to civilizational suicide. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Sure. So there are many ways to kind of expand upon it, but I'll start with the smaller examples, which is I think this is an example I shared with you earlier, but I think of the desegregation of public swimming pools in the South. I would say, what is that, the late '60s, early '70s? I'm not exactly 100% on the specific time frame, but that in response to that desegregation, a lot of communities just decided that they would rather close down the public swimming pools and take it away for everybody than to just integrate and have people talking to each other, having people exposed to one another. And that's just a microcosm of this greater thing that I see happening, which is that uh, the more you try to come up with bogeymen, the more it's a very old way of ginning up enemies. But basically, it's the immigrants, it's the liberals, it's the leftists, it's this group, it's that group. And it is a cliche to say that eventually there's nobody really left to speak out for anybody.
Yeah.
But in essence, this is the kind of direction America is going in right now, and uh, it's it's a bit of a cold feeling, especially when it feels like folks from all sorts of different groups now are under a sort of magnifying glass of not, how do I put this? Seems like everybody in some respect is feeling threatened right now, and there is not a collective mechanism for us to all be a part of to like feel like, all right, this is the thing that is going to represent my anxieties authentically in a very like real way that is not currently in existence, not in the current form of the Democratic Party or any other potential third parties. But um, I see that this type of cultural atomization is what I would call it, where based upon America's history of separating folks, we reach a point where we forget that this country started from the death of natives, from war and genocide and disease. It is built on the labor of enslaved peoples for hundreds of years. It basically goes through that. And then it is also at the same time constantly taking in people from all sorts of places. Chinese Americans being in America in the early 19th century, building the railroads. We can go through every European community that, or Europe, a group of Europeans that, for reasons related to economic or political insecurity in their own home countries, they ended up in America legally or illegally. That has been a thing that has always been a part of America's DNA, which is that no matter what is happening, if you know, if you want to make it work here, you can do it. There's a little bit of that. I mean, people associate the American dream with a strictly kind of capitalist context. But for
Yes.
me, it's also a cultural thing where it's like, okay, we come here and the problems of the old world don't exist here, and
Yeah.
it's not, and it's not, it's less. It really has to do with like people live in countries where they must think about war, they must think about possible invasion, they have to think about planes in the skies and missiles coming down on their heads. Americans don't have that problem. And that's that's a blessing of geography and
Yeah.
of forked circumstance that uh, our neighbors to our north are not warmongers who are trying to start some nonsense with us. Canada, very nice people.
Yeah.
Uh, Mexico, we all know about um, the how do I put this? The history of organized crime and human trafficking and those things taking place along the border, but that
Yeah.
the government of Mexico and Mexican people in general, that like this is not a place where we think to ourselves, oh, they're gonna like, you know, bomb Florida or something, or like do something like that nature. Like we don't have to like have those kinds of thoughts. In many respects, I view the current paranoia about immigrants and about folks from uh, Hispanic backgrounds and whatnot of almost being like a response to the lack of true genuine threats where when you don't have like a real threat on your borders, well then you gotta come up with one to justify your ethno supremacist way of doing things. Like it actually kind of makes a lot of sense to me in that regard.
Yeah. Yeah. You talked about, you know, um, you talked about you talked about a new story, right? And you use the example of Bosnia and Herzegovina, um, and how the interplays of those countries, and you talked about India, and you talked about examples of cultures that learn that. intermarriage and cultural change is an imperative to prevent civilizational decay. Um, civilization. So that's a very interesting thing to talk about. Could you go a little bit into about that? I use the examples of the Japanese, the Arabs, Vietnamese. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, so essentially, from my own cursory study of history, I'm by no means a historian, and I will not claim to have a very full, comprehensive, knowledge of world history. But there are very clear examples where countries that embark upon the sort of cultural supremacist, sort of racial supremacist, religious supremacy of sorts, whenever a country embarks upon that kind of path, it always ends up that the nation is humiliated in some way, either by foreign conquest, uh, insane political instability, or that you are forced as a country to pay reparations for decades to account for the countless deaths that you incurred upon the rest of the world because your country embarked upon this path of purity is the word
Yeah,
I would focus on.
yeah,
Where and we associate this, I think there's a bit of like how do I put this? We place greater recognition on the countries and societies that uh, grew to massive sizes and launched the big military campaigns and wars of conquest. And we tend to think a little bit less of what the result of that endeavor was. And we don't place a lot of emphasis on places where a compromise was made, or where the people they didn't close borders. All right, they didn't say this group of people is not allowed or this people is preferential or whatnot. Not to say that this is like a consistent dynamic, but rather the countries and cultures that I think of, especially um, Iranian background. So I'm gonna obviously be a little bit biased about it, but in the
yeah.
Iranian context, uh, it's been a place where ethnic groups, religious groups have lived for thousands of years. Like, and it's not, it's imperfect. Don't let me be like, oh, this is like some, fantastic example we should all aspire to. No, that's not exactly what I'm trying to say. But more that, uh, if it goes on for that long, then there is something to be said about the fact that the Iranian national identity persists, even though there is not that uniform ethnic or religious breakdown that would kind of
Right.
enforce that idea. And another example, and this is a part of uh, another example I'll bring up is Ukraine, and
Mhm.
this is something that really affected my own judgment about how the war would kind of play out. It's by no means over, and I don't make any predictions or anything of that sort. But I always knew that they would resist stronger with or without the West helping them than anyone would have been prepared to understand, because the legacy of different cultures and religions mixing in that part of Europe specifically is quite unique. It's not the case that a country in Europe, especially Eastern Europe, has a sort of balanced relationship, I would say, with either Turkic or Turkish or just Islamic cultures in general that Ukraine had. It's not to say that those cultures, or how do I put this? It's not that Ukraine is able to do what it does because of the existence of one culture or another within its borders, but rather that the notion of a Ukrainian national identity that exists outside of, say, like Orthodox religion, because Ukraine right now, its leader, he's Jewish. It's an Orthodox majority state. You're not really getting the sense that people believe that he's, not in it for them. He's quite frankly Ukrainian. His native tongue is Russian. Ukraine is a country that had a significant Russian-speaking population, but that didn't necessarily mean that they associated with Russia, the country. Uh,
Right.
in many respects, Ukraine to me represented this. this dynamic where the more tolerant, or maybe even tolerant is not the right word, because when you use the word tolerant, it's like, all right, I'm okay with you being here. It sounds a little bit, it's a little bit loose, but like where it's like truly accepted, where it's truly like integrated, which doesn't mean that everyone's intermarrying or whatever, but that no one's got a problem with the other person being there. In fact, they have
Yeah.
like really deep, expensive relationships. And that a country like that, they'll hope they're gonna be in it for the long run. They're not gonna. This isn't this thing that is like a joke, And in many respects, I think this is why it kind of surprised Americans, anyways, because uh, for Americans, but the last 25 years, when we think of America doing something militarily, there's I mean, you could go further than that in the 30 years or whatever, but just for the purposes of this, for my own generation, we grew up through the war on terror. We grew up seeing how much of America's wealth, what's the phrase, like blood and treasure was spilled, and all of the blood spilled in the Middle East nonsensically for basically nothing.
Yeah.
Like, we see all of that, and we Americans kind of have an aversion to hearing that America is doing something militarily or providing military assistance to a country or whatever. And I think the situation with Ukraine shows that uh, we underestimate the power of places that, like, are not known for being like a big old empire or super economic superpower or anything of that sort. Like, we don't value those countries, but when it comes down to it, they're the countries that show us what we're supposed to do. Like,
Hmm.
they show the way. And it wasn't necessarily my intention to focus on Ukraine, but there's just one other kind of tidbit and story that really would encapsulate why I placed a lot of focus on Ukraine, which is their revolution in 2014, referred to as the Maidan Revolution. Maidan was the name of the main square where the revolution occurred, but it's also referred to as the Revolution of Dignity.
Yeah.
And for me, dignity as a unifying kind of political force it just seems very interesting to me, because based upon everything I've told you, you could imagine, like, like, there's a documentary on Netflix, Winter on Fire. It's really good. I enjoyed it a lot, but you'll
Okay.
see that this was like every sort of person was there in the streets, taking rubber bullets, live bullets, fighting together against a corrupt sort of police force, which at the time, in 2014, what precipitated the revolution was basically the president, who was Russian backed, reneging on his commitments to economic integration or economic cooperation with the West and Europe, and then Russia's on the other side. And there was a whole bunch of, I'm doing a very light retelling of the history there, but essentially people realized that no matter their political bent, or like no matter their background, they all recognized that it was undignified that they lived somewhere where the government just so flagrantly did not care what the people wanted, even though it told them one thing and then it was doing another. Like, for them, it was as simple as that you must at least make sense to us. Like, you have to at least be representative of our wants and need. Like, you can't just lie to us the whole time and then go do
Yeah.
another thing. Like, what kind of people are we if we let that happen? And that's
Yeah.
why that entire revolution was composed of all different backgrounds and all different class. It was the multi-class struggle, by the way. You had doctors, lawyers, students, ex-military. Yeah, you had folks who were homeless, who were unhoused. You had uh, how do I like religious figures of all the major faiths. They called them the men of prayer because they more or less all prayed together before each impending class state authorities. Uh,
Yeah.
incredibly inspiring for me. And it's a real shame that Americans, they don't, I mean, not that it's Americans' fault, whether that they don't know about it as well as they could or they should, but that there is the examples of civic nationalism being this unifying force for a revolution that was really based upon a simple sort of, we're all in this together. Like it was a very much a political moment of we're all in this together, where folks who did not know each other were laying next to each other side by side, bleeding out because they both believed that there was something better for them. And if, and then after the president fled to Russia and the revolution more or less succeeded, 1 week later the Russian Federation invades Crimea, and the Russo-Ukrainian War more or less begins there in 2014. So I'm sorry, that was a little bit of like a kind
Yeah,
of
that's,
wet.
no, I mean, uh, clearly you've thought about this, right? On a very deep level. Um, and that's the thing is, there's so much here that you've written down. One of the more interesting concepts, and this going back to this idea of we're all in this together, right? Is that you talked about how we can't necessarily address economic inequality uh, in this country if the majority white population is not on board uh, with that idea. If they want to sort of silo themselves into a kind of uh, economic sort of exclusionary economic silo, right? Where they're unconcerned with how the rest of the country is doing, right? And we can't get to your inclusive vision of America without getting that in particular on board. It, is that kind of like what you were saying, or
Yeah, yeah. There has to be, if we believe in democracy, if we believe in one person, one vote, if we believe that uh, our country should be representative, that it's democratic, then we have to acknowledge that the future, a political revolution or a political movement that challenges this encroaching fascism that we are witnessing, it can't only be composed of like everybody who has been oppressed, because eh, that to me fundamentally it's, how do I put this? I- Oppressed people shouldn't just do all the work. All right, like it's kind of just like this. We can't. There is this like old school kind of like liberal instinct of like uh or what I would, maybe I should qualify it as like an old school white liberal instinct of like yeah, I don't have a problem. It's not, this is not me. I hope they figure it out. I hope they get I hope they get their rights, man. Or I hope they, like, it's just like this
yeah,
kind of lackadaisical sort of like, what am I gonna do? And it's like, no, that cannot be acceptable. All right, that cannot. Um, and rather than viewing that through a frame of like contempt or like this sense of like, in order to remedy, in order to achieve economic or racial justice, that there's going to be some sort of like element of like retribution. And for me, I'm just like, no, like that's just, you're just trying to kind of like, it may be cathartic in a way to think of or imagine a situation that is like, uh, there's retribution towards uh, a group that has played a kind of loose role in your worsening conditions. But for me, it's more like, all right, we have a whole chunk of people of different minority backgrounds, all of whom are not very like strictly restricted to like one political view or another. It's like a lot of folks from immigrant backgrounds also just kind of they don't buy into the notion that there is like a racial struggle to be held here, but rather that America needs to just really live up to the written ideals of its visionaries. Where it's actually a funny thing. Uh, Random historical tidbit. Iran has a 1905, 1906. They have this thing called the Constitutional Revolution. Uh, but basically, long story short, the Iranians who were in charge of that movement at the time were staying at the British embassy, and they were talking to the British about just like what it is they're trying to do. The British didn't know what to do with all. There was like 30,000 Iranian men within the British like embassy compound at the time. That's where like these guys like went to go gather and have their political discussions. And long story short, one of the members of the Iranian delegation is more or less telling the British that, we love the Western literature, we love the ideals and whatnot. We just wish you would live up to them, because this will make it a lot easier to do, like to relate to you. This would make it a lot easier for us to communicate with you, because
Right.
you guys have one thing written down, and then you're doing a whole other another thing. Like, what is this? So we can't wrap our minds around this.
Yeah.
Like, and that is kind of the essence of this, which is like, if you are not honest about what it is you are doing and who it is we are as a nation, as a culture, I mean, how can we expect to fix anything? Like, you don't fix something. You don't make something make sense by appealing to the sensibilities of the unsensible. Like, you can't keep lying to yourself. If you do, you're just gonna end up crashing and burning. This ties into the notion that segregating America and dividing people and atomizing groups. It's like it's suicide.
It's unsustainable.
It's unsustainable. Exactly.
Yeah. No, I fully agree with that. Um, and I think that I thought it was interesting you talked about this idea of how white liberals there's this white liberal impulse to externalize problems and kind of like distance themselves, more or less distance themselves, or keep it at arm's distance. Say, hey, we love that you're doing this, and we love that you're a part of this struggle, and we fully uh support it, but we're just going to sort of support it from here. You can do it over there. We're going to support it from over here, right? And it's kind of like it's not like a non-committal thing, to them. It seems like to that particular group of white liberals, and this sort of non-committal uh, politics, where I think is kind of how we got here, right?
Yeah.
Um, you know, I think politics is very interactive. Like, you have to get involved. You have to become a part of the process, particularly in a democracy, and in a multiracial democracy. Um, one is almost like a pillar where the rights of others uphold your right. So if you are not able to uphold the rights of minority groups, then your rights will also follow with the erosion of their rights. Um, so this non-committal politics is how we get to the politics of Trump. And you talked about, you know, sort of uh, contrasting, right? Contrasting your philosophy with MAGA, and how we need to create a framework on the left, in particular, that uh, talks about that sort of fleshes out a philosophical system that allows us to get to your vision, right? And is not solely concerned with material conditions. Um, so yeah, I think I fully agree with that philosophy. So what would you say are the pillars of the civic nationalist philosophy?
How many pillars did you say? Sorry, you cut out for a second.
I was saying what would you say are the pillars of the civic nationalist philosophy?
Sure. Mainly that the thing that I would kind of articulate it as a sort of constitutional, legitimacy, like movement thing, where it's like, okay, for all of human history, how we have more or less ended up um, functioning as societies has been consensus, has been compromise. It's been the consensus among norms and rules and things of that nature, and then eventually laws that has helped societies stay together. That has helped people feel like they are a part of something. And this kind of can extend. This can be used in a religious sort of connotation as well, where like societies have functioned more or less because of a majority having a sort of shared religious background, such that the laws of the nation make sense to them because they are more or less rooted in that previous morality. And in that sense, civic nationalism in this context specifically, you see, I argue that if you want to come up with something that really works for everybody, you got to talk to everybody. You got to kind of read a little bit of everybody. You got to know a little bit about every different group and culture within America. You start with the indigenous, which is admittedly the most difficult, to be quite frank, because like it's just harder. But it starts from them, and it ends with the most recent groups of people to arrive here. And my point is that if you take the time, oh, sorry, let me check the battery on my phone. Uh, I'll finish this thought and I'll grab my charger. But essentially, that if you take the
No
time to
problem.
you incorporate all these perspectives, you're going to come up with a much better answer than what you got now. Not
Yeah.
because the people who come up with the previous answers are wrong, or well, let me be clear. It's like it is wrong for ethno supremacy. That's not necessarily that's not the thing that I go for, but rather that everything you do and say is wrong, and you gotta listen to somebody else. It's not that. It's just uh, times have changed. You have different. I mean, from a left wing perspective, you have different material conditions now. All right, it's not the 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 traditional left wing politic was conceived of like at the peak of industrial revolution. I would articulate like it comes from a different sort of like climate.
Yeah.
Whereas now we gotta do things a little bit differently. We have to update the language, the rhetoric, the vision. Like it can't be because in that sense, if we restrict ourselves to the writings and teachings of uh, European philosophers and thinkers from the 18th and 19th centuries. Like, okay, like, that was probably, it had its effects in the 20th century. Many would argue that we are still living through the effects of that.
Yeah.
Maybe it would do these societies, specifically the United States, a favor to start incorporating some newer perspectives. I mean, maybe we can actually come up with something that feels real to everybody and is not just like we're spectators to like a slow motion car crash that we can't do anything about. And at the same time, life is getting harder for lots more people.
Yeah. You talk, the what I'm getting a sense of is that what you're saying is that we need to update our civilizational software, right?
Correct.
In a certain sense, right? We need to the underlying hardware is is working correctly, but our software, the thing that we're running on, is going is not working in the way it should work, right? So
Right.
um I thought that there's this you talked about the liberal drive to make each minority group more white, and you said that those who immigrate to America do not seek to be white. um they seek to be free of the prejudices of the old world. There's this concept that, we talked earlier, about how American, what basically to be American means to be white, basically. Uh, in the old conception of American. So in this new conception of America, what could you tell me? Could you flesh out a little bit? Um, what immigrants when immigrants come to America, what is their ideal of America? What is or what is it that immigrants see in America that America doesn't see in itself?
Okay. First of all, can you hear me still?
Yeah,
Okay, so
yeah.
I just want to double check that. But you have to excuse me for a second while my camera is off. But
No
first
problem.
off, I guess I would start with each immigrant's background is different based upon their own experiences and where they come from and the cultural context that they define themselves from. But uh, I guess I would start with my answer with the perspective of Iranian immigrants. So some Iranians, a lot of Iranians, in fact, came to the U.S. Fleeing persecution um, from the Islamic Revolution based upon their religious or political backgrounds.
Mhm.
Um, while some maybe not necessarily persecuted in Iran, still come for the ability to kind of build a more legitimate. I don't know if career or life would be the right words to use because it's a little bit more than that. A better way to describe it would be that uh, a professional in Iran is not going to have the same quality of life or the same sense of agency that they would have in America. And that for them, coming to America was not even a really like ideological thing. It was not like a very romantic thing. It was more just like, okay, when I come here, I can breathe. No, it's like when I come here, I can breathe and not think too much about like I don't know if world events would be the right way to put it, but going back to the thing we talked some ideas we had earlier, where it's like Americans don't have to think about uh, nearby war or nearby conflict being something, and i- it's this thing where part of the immigrant identity and experience and what we're looking for here is to build something that we don't think that somebody is going to either take away from us because of our religious background or our ethnic background or because of something we said on the internet or something we wrote down before or any association we had.
Okay.
Um, but that's just like one form of experience. A lot of people they come for just the opportunity to get a house, to have a little piece of the American dream. As much of a cliche as it is, it's
Yeah.
in America you can make a lot more money than you can in a lot of other countries, and for a lot of Americans, it's relative because different standards and qualities of life. But for others, for a lot of immigrant folks, like you come here, it's more stable, it's more reliable. The way you can make a name for yourself if you have just like even a shred of initiative compared to a lot of other countries. Like having just that shred of initiative gets you a lot further in America, and that would get you where you came from. Not necessarily even for political reasons, but for just like economic reasons.
Yeah.
So it's the immigrant experience is quite diverse, but overall, I would say that there is an expectation of reliability and stability, and maybe for some, even a sense of like, all right, after everything I've been through, I just deserve to be somewhere that's peaceful, or this is somewhere that is free from some of those burdens of the old world.
And then they come to America of the modern day, and they find out that it's basically just like, in many respects, just like the old world, where you have these um, you have some of the same old world prejudices, and uh, you have the tribalism, and the racism, and so forth. So you know that part of America still has not been addressed and dealt with. And your document went over some of the, you could say, anxieties of white America, right? You talked about how America, particularly, working class, rural working class whites, have certain grievances, um, and that they, as a result of having these grievances, it's resulted in MAGA politics, right? And it's also kind of resulted in a um, it's resulted in a society where we have a, what's the word? Uh, we're kind of, I think it's resulting in a society where we're kind of held hostage to this particular group in Middle America who, along with their grievances, they have taken the level of discourse, I guess, to a point to where it like if it's not addressed, it's going to sort of drag the country down. Is that kind of what you're saying, or?
Yeah, I would say that. I would kind of describe it as, we can't expect that a comprehensive political change in America is going to happen without the majority of Americans having a say in it, or rather, at least being a part of it. Like there's this sense of how do I put this? The impression one gets from America's current media landscape is is not always going to be like reflective of realities, in negative ways and in positive ways. Where in many respects, what media is trying to do or accomplish is quite aspirational and is trying to change folks' minds. But in the process of elevating newer perspectives, we have almost forgotten how to like bring in the people who it's not that the newer perspectives are meant to kind of tell them that, oh, what you said or thought was bad, or oh, like it's not always that direct, but it exists, and for them there is not something new for them to attach themselves to that is positive, but also just feels real to them. That it's kind of grounded in, which is a little bit funny for me to put it that way, because what I'm hoping and whatnot is, it's quite aspirational, but this kind of comprehensive aspirational movement, it's a more grounded to them than just top down kind of like, all right, this is how we do it or whatever. This is um if you don't use the right vernacular, you're gonna, I don't know, just obviously the right wing media ecosystem messes with people's perceptions, and all media, frankly, for that matter, messes with people's perceptions of reality. But they are targeted by specific like media groups, like Middle America, white rural America. They are targeted for their votes, for their influence. Like, it's not, in many respects, I can't always just be like dismissive or just upset. At a certain point, like, I have to think to myself, like, all right, like, does anyone really want things to endure like this any longer? Like, y- yeah, they're getting red meat right now from the racial vitriol, the immigration crackdown. Like, they're it's sure, okay, like, they have spent decades watching stuff that has kind of more or less primed them for this, you could say. But their community is still not doing great. Like, it's still they still in I live in Kentucky right now. I live in Louisville, and
Yeah.
the current legislative changes in the bill that just passed that guts Medicaid and like closes rural hospitals, like, that is going to devastate a lot of places that voted for Donald Trump, that identified with him. And there's something to be said. This is obviously like a bad thing that is happening, but there's also something to be said where, if you want to make the argument that white identity politics, like whiteness, does not serve you well,
Mm.
it's like, see this. It's like, you guys pick the most racist guy you could find. Like, this is the most like intolerant person, like the most corrupt. This is the most like whatever. It's like, yeah, okay, you stuck it to the liberals, all right. You stuck it to the people with different colored hair or whatever. Like, okay, but my guy, your hospital is closing down. You are going to be 150 miles away from the nearest hospital now. Okay, like, this is not a joke. Like,
Yeah.
and it's not that they don't
Yeah.
take it seriously either. Like, it's not even it's not an argument where like they didn't think about this, but rather, like, you have been distracted. You have been fed this lie that there's nothing that can be done, or that there's no hope, and that the only way we can handle this is if we make America's demographic or ethnic makeup look like the way it was when America was a lot more stable for the working class. Like, they make that argument, that where it's like, oh, well, it's the cultural, it's the immigrants. Like, of course it is, because that's the only thing I really noticed being different. And there is something to be said that if you want to tell them that white supremacy or just whiteness is like a political thing, and thinking about just white Christian as like the only thing that matters to you or whatever, but if that's the only thing that matters, it's like, well, I got news for you. Like, this is the zenith of that. That got you what you have now. And like, how good is it? Is this it? Like, is this all you want? Like, is this the end? Is this like we just have to be on this crappy journey that just gets worse and worse and worse, and it's just like, that's what you wanted? Like, that's not what you wanted. Like,
Yeah.
it's not, it's not. How do I? There's another thing to be said, which is that uh, a person's racial, how do I put this? Like, a racist person is not a lost cause. You don't necessarily have to hope that they become a full on, uh, like, I don't expect a guy in the boonies who's never seen somebody who looks like me to listen to me and be like, all right, yeah, I'll go full anti-racist, and I'll do this or that, or say this or say that, or wear this thing, or have this apparel. Like, it's like, no, but they should at the very least know we're on the same team. Like, they should at the very least know that it's like, dude, what problem could I really have with you if like we've never met each other? Or like, it's just kind of approaching it from a very grounded sort of like, yeah, I'm not here to tell you like how to live or whatever. But like, is this really a good idea? Like, is this thing good for you that is happening? Did Donald Trump really do you any favors? Did Mitch McConnell really like he told you to go F your stuff? Like what do you like, what do you like this is not good. Like don't you guys care? And then the thing is you hear is that they say of course we care. But like for a very expansive list of reasons, they don't have any sense of buy-in into anybody else saying otherwise. So if we want to have this big great change, I need we need those people to have a buy-in. Like we need to give them something that works, and it can't. It's not about them knowing and agreeing with every 100% what we want, but rather if we can agree, if we can agree on the cultural national outlook almost, then I feel like I can get them to more to like be on my side when it comes to like the economic stuff and the racial justice. Like it all kind of feeds in because if you wanted to like really boil it down to it, like the right is all about culture.
Yeah.
And rather than just kind of being like, well, that's the way they do it, we'll do the materialist form or whatever. Like it's that's not that to me is kind of just sitting on one side of the hill, you know. Like I want to engage. I want to not isolate myself in terms of ideas or strategies for breaking through this moment.
Yeah, and I think it really, this sort of far rightist vision that is being foisted upon us right now with MAGA. Um, it's almost diametrically opposed to the American ideal of individualism, right? This idea of individuals that there were individuals who are a part of this fabric called America, but we're all living our own individual lives, and we have this idea of choice. They're all of their policies, all of their policies are almost diametrically opposed to the idea of choice. They don't want you to have choices. They don't want women to have choices. Um, they want to restrict some of your economic choices. They want to do away with, uh, you know, they want to do away. They actually, so monopoly, like there's this. I think that you know they don't want. I don't think that they want an economy that is composed of uh, that where competition is like a thing. You um, a lot of the people supporting them, a lot of the billionaires and uh, big money that's supporting them, they want more monopoly,
That's right.
right? So I think that all of those things are all diametrically opposed to what America is supposed to be. So we're literally going in the opposite direction of the America that showed some promise after Reconstruction, that America. And it also showed promise after the 1960s, right? After all the civil rights legislation was brought in. That was another America that was looking forward to another direction. So you talked about, um, and I don't know how much time you have, but I, I don't want this to go for too long, but I do want to go over a couple more things that you did talk about in your document. But
Sure.
um, you talked about a nation that values the wants and needs of billionaires is no different from a decadent monarch that protects his nobility above all else. Could you go in a little bit more about that? Because that's fascinating. We think of monarchies as this one guy you know, whom contrasts to the commoners, right? But in America, it's actually the people who have almost monarchical power in America are a group of people, right? So you know, some people call that obviously. Some people call that the oligarchy, right? So you're saying that these people who have these this group of people is no different from a monarchy. That's very fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, I would compare it to like it depends on, this is a very would be a very simple way of describing it, but there's the king and there's the court. And right now it's like we think of the court around Donald Trump as like maybe like, I don't know, his advisors or the political folks. But the reality is that the billionaires, if they have this amount of influence and this amount of control, it almost it strikes me as like an insular kind of palace sort of dynamic where it's like everything internally is like talked about, right? Like they're talking to each other, they live in their bubble, in their world, where their problems are the ones only being considered. And the effects that it has, it creates like almost like a neo-feudal sort of dynamic where I think there's a Greek economist who describes the current situation as like techno-feudalism.
Yeah,
It, it makes sense to me in terms of like the height of power for tech companies, but uh, I think it almost it's not exclusively tech based. I guess I would say because America has always had the problem of the rich having too much of a say in politics, and really the last ever since Citizens United, it's just like exploded. Like it just has reached a level that is worse than the Gilded Age, I guess I would say. Because well, all right, I don't know if I'm qualified to make that statement. We'll just say it's comparable, all right, at the very least, because I don't want to make assumptions. But
yeah.
it's very reminiscent of that. Except it's worse now because uh, they can insulate themselves more from the public than I think folks back then could. I would say that is very much true.
Yeah.
But basically, we end up in this dynamic where we're stuck in a very simplistic kind of almost. I mean, it not almost. It is idiotic. Like we're on an idiotic path right now, and it just feels like we got. Uh, this is so cliche. It's like we got the Mad King and like all of his people around him, just like taking advantage and like stealing from the kingdom's treasury and just like lining their own pockets while the people are getting hungry outside the walls. And like it's very the analogy is there. I think most people would understand like what's happening there. So that's just the way
Very
I saw it too.
very Game of Thrones.
Yeah,
Uh, yeah, it's giving Game of Thrones for sure.
yeah.
Uh, you talked about the in order to destroy white supremacy, we must practice a politics that puts dignity at the heart of it. Um, Dignity at the heart of our politics. What does that look like? What does it look like to have dignity at the heart of our politics?
So it boils down to like I'll use a very I'll use this example, but if it's a difficult process for me to get to the hospital, that's an indignity that I'm suffering. Like if it's like medical debt is undignified. All right, like uh, being forced into positions where you must suffer because you were trying to do the right thing, where you were trying to be uh, like participate in society, where you wanted to. How do I put this? Like it's undignified that someone can't get across this country in an affordable way. Where like you have to buy a car. Like okay, you have to make certain purchases in order to live a very basic life in America. And for me, in many respects, that is undignified. Like it shouldn't be this thing where the amount of money I have, or frankly the prestige of the job I have, like giving me a specific like health insurance or whatnot. It's kind of it's an abomination to me, quite frankly, because it's like uh, in my mind, a dignified society is something we would describe as civilized. And that word civilized has been used in like racial supremacist ways, and is used in like ethnic supremacist ways of like, oh, we got to teach these people this, or they should do things the way we thought. And I articulate it in like a very simple way of like, there are basic functions of the modern society. All right, people should be able to get to wherever they need to get to, and it shouldn't kill them or make them poor. All right, they shouldn't be suffering from medical debt or fear of medical debt and dying prematurely because of our current healthcare system. I just like that's not civilized to me. That's savage. Like that's like a there is like this glossy like cover on the American life, but in reality, and you pull it away, it's like this. It's not good. Like it's not something that people are like very proud of. They're not like saying like, oh my god, I love America's public transportation system. I nobody says that. Okay, there is no American public transportation system. There is the interstate highway system. All right, let's let's not like pretend like nobody can do anything. But it's my way of saying that we don't have these sorts of national programs or accomplishments or things that we are like, okay, like it may not be perfect, but we're doing things like this, and like that gives me hope, and like that's it's like there's something quite constructive and dignified about living in a country that you're not ashamed of. It's not always going to be perfect for everybody, like I'd rather than seeing like utopia as like some goal that we're striving for. It's rather just like uh, there's basic human values that we all share, and when we frame it in the context of dignity, where I don't feel like I am being uh how to put this, like talked down to or looked down upon, either because of my education or my background or where I grew up. Like it's this type of feeling that people resent the most in our current political environment. And I think for every group of people out there in American society, even people you might not like necessarily agree with on a lot of things, there is going to be these cross sectional indignities that none of us really, we don't like it. We don't enjoy the fact that we have to be associated with that. So when we put dignity at the heart of how we think about politics, we end up less in a place of strict sorts of like moral arguments or material arguments, but it comes into like a philosophical one of like, there are basic things that we're going to do here because this is America. Okay. And medical debt is not going to be one of them. All right. Like you are not going to be impoverished because of an accident that happens to you. Okay. Or because of where you were born. All right. Like it's this type of sentiment.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's yeah. I couldn't put it better myself. You talk about, and I want to kind of, I guess we'll kind of end it on this last question here. Um, but uh, you talked about the moral argument against racism must admit is not enough on its own. Uh, so you said that the moral argument against racism is. Could you expand a little bit on that?
Yeah. 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 So I would say that the past decade in American political culture, uh, the Black experience and the experiences of all sorts of different groups has come to light. Like it's really become the American like cultural landscape in this respect has gotten more diverse. Like it has become like there are tangible sorts of cultural differences now that I wasn't maybe expecting 10 years ago. Like it's impressive in that respect. But I think this is something you and I said at the beginning of our conversation, where in order for us to really think of something different or for us to change things right now, we have to accept that every argument or every movement that we have been a part of is a contributing factor to where we're at. This is about like this sense of like shared responsibility for the current moment we have, where it's not uh, it's not a simple thing of like, oh, this person didn't do this or this person didn't do that. It's kind of like this sense of like uh, even though all of these things that happened were moral, like all of these marches were moral things that were good and the sentiment was good, like it was fundamentally still not enough if we ended up like, once again with Donald Trump. It's just it's not enough. Like there was no real power built from it. There was no significant group of elected officials within the United States government that really took that and turned it into power, where things were changed structurally in response to those movements. And uh, we have progressive members, and we've had like it's not to dismiss the electoral victories that have been made or dismiss the history made by people assuming office as the first of their background or whatnot. But it's just kind of like it's like we're okay with the image of it, but we're not willing to put in the work to kind of do the substantive thing, because the substantive thing is not achieved in an easy way. It's through hard work. It's through sacrifice. It's through giving up a bit of your personal comfort to like actually go work on something that like fundamentally bothers you. So in this way, that's what I mean by the moral argument not being enough. Because if the way I would see it is like we've just had a decade long conversation about morals and values, and that's been good. But it's not enough. That's not. You need power. If you wanna fight this, that you need the power. Like it's not, this is not something that will be given.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's often said that, well, you could say that a moral argument, in order for a moral argument to be successful, you have to have a conscience. But if you don't have a conscience, and more importantly, you don't have one because you're not willing to acknowledge the history. You're not willing to acknowledge the other side. Um, then the moral argument is going to be ineffective, right? And
Correct.
that's what we're seeing with the MAGA movement. They're not willing, completely unwilling to acknowledge American history that does not conform to their narrative, right? And so, and they're completely unwilling to listen to the other side. It is dogged, dogmatic unwillingness to listen to the other side, and so moral arguments on this group of people just is not going to work. Um, so yeah, that makes complete sense. Um, I w- you know, thank you, Vafa, for. We're gonna have to end it on this note because I don't want it to go too long.
No, I got you.
There are a lot of things that I think we can explore at a later time in another live session.
Of course.
But thank you for coming on. This has been a very, very thought provoking discussion. Um, and looking forward to having you on another time.
Thank you. Likewise. I really appreciate you inviting me, and I'm happy to do it again anytime.
All right. See you later.
Take care.
Bye, guys.
Bye bye.